The rain came down hard on Gangnam that night. Not the soft kind. The kind that hits concrete and bounces back up. The kind that soaks through a coat in 30 seconds and doesn't apologize for it. It was a Friday in October. 11:47 p.m. and ONYX, Seoul's most exclusive members-only club, was at full capacity. The line outside stretched half a block. People in expensive clothes standing under umbrellas they were too proud to share. A black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened. Maya Osei stepped out alone. She was 28, Nigerian, wearing a simple black coat, belted at the waist. No jewelry except one thin gold chain that disappeared under her collar. She didn't look around when she stepped out the way most people do, checking to see who was watching. She just moved. Calm, direct, like someone who had been walking into difficult rooms her entire life and had stopped being impressed by any of them. She was 6 months pregnant. Nobody could tell under the coat. She was meeting her best friend Park Soo-yeon inside. They had a table. She had done this before. Come here, shown her card, walked in. Simple. Routine. The kind of thing that shouldn't require any thought at all. Park Sung-jin was at the door. He was 26. Built wide. The kind of guy who had been told he was intimidating enough times that he'd started to believe it was a personality. He had been working the door at ONYX for 8 months. In those 8 months, he had turned away people he didn't like the look of, pocketed tips from people he let through early, and been warned twice by his manager about his attitude. Both times he had nodded and changed nothing. He watched Maya walk up from the car. His face didn't change, but his posture did. That small shift people make when they've already decided something before any information has been exchanged. Maya reached into her coat pocket and held out her membership card. Black, embossed. The kind of card that isn't applied for online. The kind that gets hand-delivered. Sung-jin looked at it, then at her. Then he reached out and knocked it out of her hand. It hit the wet pavement. The line went quiet. Maya looked down at the card. Then she bent to pick it up. Sung-jin grabbed her arm. Hard. Pulled her back upright. One of his colleagues at the door looked away. A woman in line put her hand over her mouth. A man in the back pulled out his phone and started recording. Sung-jin said something in Korean. Low. Dismissive. The kind of thing said to someone you've already decided doesn't matter. Then he raised his open hand and slapped Maya across the face. The sound cut straight through the rain. The crowd reacted, not with noise, but with that specific silence that only happens when something crosses a line everyone present recognizes. 2 people stepped back. The man recording didn't move. A woman near the front of the line turned to the person next to her and said nothing, just looked. Maya didn't go down, didn't make a sound. She straightened up slowly, brought one hand up and touched her cheek. Not frantically, just once, the way you check a surface to see if it was hot. Then she lowered her hand and looked at Sung-jin. Not with anger, not with tears, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from shock. The kind that comes from a person who has already moved 3 steps past the moment everyone else is still standing in. She picked up her card from the ground, turned around, walked back to the car. She got in, closed the door. The car didn't move. Inside, she sat completely still for 10 seconds. Then she took out her phone and pressed one name in her contacts. It rang once. A man's voice answered. Low, like he'd been awake the whole time. Yobo. Maya looked straight ahead through the rain-covered windshield. Onyx. Gangnam. Tonight. She hung up. Outside, Sung-jin was already back at his post, laughing about something with his colleague. The line started moving again. The man who recorded it lowered his phone and looked at the screen for a second, then pocketed it. By morning, that video would have 3 million views. But right now, none of that had happened yet. Right now, it was just rain on a windshield and a woman sitting very still in the back of a car, one hand resting quietly on her stomach. Before we go any further, I've got to ask, are you watching this alone, or is someone right there with you? And where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Drop it in the comments. Welcome to Afro-Korean Confessions TV. 4 years before that night, Maya had stood outside a different building in Seoul. Not a club, a hospital. It was 2 a.m. She was 24. Still new enough to this city that she kept a folded map in her bag, even though she never used it, just like knowing it was there. She was outside because she couldn't be inside anymore. She had been sitting in a waiting room for 6 hours watching a man she had known for 8 months fight to stay alive after 3 of his own people put 2 bullets in him in a parking garage in Mapo. The doctors said he would make it. What they didn't say What nobody said out loud was that the men who shot him were dead before the ambulance arrived. Handled by the two people who had been with J1 that night and had watched the whole thing happen and done nothing to stop it because they were the ones who arranged it. Maya knew this because J1 told her himself. 3 weeks later, sitting across from her at a small table in her apartment, eating the jollof rice she had made because it was the only thing she knew how to cook when she didn't know what else to do. You already knew, she said. It wasn't a question. I suspected, he said. And you still went. He didn't answer that. She put her fork down. Why are you telling me this? He looked at her across the table. This man who controlled 4 districts of the most dangerous city in Asia, who had never once in his life explained himself to anyone, and said, because I don't want there to be anything between us that you didn't choose to know. That was the moment. Not the first dinner. Not the first time he smiled. Not the first time he reached for her hand. That was the moment Maya Osei understood exactly who Kim Jae-won was, and chose to stay anyway. Maya grew up in Mushin. If you know Lagos, you know what that means. If you don't, picture a neighborhood where the roads have more potholes than asphalt, where generators run 22 hours a day because the power grid is a suggestion, where everyone is hustling so hard and so constantly that stillness itself starts to feel suspicious. Her mother, Grace, sold fabric in the Tejuosho market. Up at 4 a.m., back by 9 p.m. Every day except Sunday, when she went to church and thanked God for everything she had and asked for the strength to want nothing more. Maya's father left when she was 6. She didn't remember it as a dramatic event. One day he was there, then he wasn't. Her mother never said his name again, and Maya took that as instruction. She had 2 younger brothers, Khalad and Femi. She fed them breakfast before school every morning from age 10. Not because her mother asked her to, because someone had to, and she was the oldest. She was brilliant in a way that made her teachers uncomfortable. Not because she was disruptive, she was the opposite. She sat in the back and said almost nothing, and then wrote exam answers that were better than anything her teachers could have produced themselves at that age. At 14, she won a state mathematics competition. The prize was a handshake from a local government official and a certificate that warped in the humidity before she got it home. At 17, she won a scholarship to study international business at Yonsei University in Seoul, South Korea. Full tuition. One of 3 Nigerian students accepted that year. The scholarship covered fees only. Not accommodation. Not books. Not the flight. Grace sat at the kitchen table the night Maya told her and looked at the letter for a long time without speaking. Then she got up, went into her bedroom, and came back with a tin Maya had never seen before. Inside was money her mother had been saving for 11 years in small notes folded tight. Emergency money. The kind you don't touch. Grace put it on the table. That covers the flight and 3 months' rent, she said. After that you figure it out. Maya looked at the tin and then at her mother. Mummy. Don't, Grace said. Just go. And don't come back small. Seoul in January hit different from Lagos in December. Maya had never been cold like that in her life. She stood outside Incheon Airport with 1 large suitcase and a carry-on and the address of her dormitory written on a piece of paper and breathed in air that felt like it had edges. She spoke 0 Korean. She learned it anyway. Not in a classroom. She was already in enough of those. She learned it by listening. On the subway. In convenience stores. In the university cafeteria where she sat alone for the first 3 weeks, eating quietly and watching the way the language moved through people's mouths. By month 4, she could follow a conversation. By month 8, she could hold one. But she made a decision early that she never reversed. She never let on in public how well she understood. Not to strangers. Not to colleagues. Not even to people she liked. Because the things people say when they think no one understands them are the most honest things they ever say. She graduated top of her program. For years. 1 part-time job the entire time, tutoring Korean high school students in English at 15,000 Korean wons an hour, 3 evenings a week, to cover what the scholarship didn't. After graduation, she got a job at a mid-sized Korean import-export firm called Hansong Trading. Started as an analyst. Moved up in 18 months to senior coordinator, which was a title that meant she was doing the work of 3 people and getting paid for 1. Her direct manager was a woman named Director Yang Jun. 54, sharp. The kind of woman who had spent 30 years being the smartest person in every room she entered and had stopped being angry about it and started being strategic about it instead. Yang pulled Maya into her office 4 months into the job. You see things, Young said. Not a compliment. More like an observation about something she was still deciding whether to trust. I pay attention, Maya said. To what? To what people do when they think no one is watching. Young looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once and told Maya she was moving her onto the firm's private client division, the accounts that didn't appear in the company's public portfolio. The ones where the meetings had no minutes and the handshakes were the contracts. The rules are different over there, Young told her. I grew up in Mushin, Maya said. I know how to read a room. Young almost smiled. By 24, Maya was the youngest senior manager in Hansong's history. She had her own apartment in Mapogu, small, clean, overlooking a narrow street lined with Pojangmaka tints that glowed orange at night. She sent money home every month, bought her mother a new sewing machine, paid Khalad's university fees. She had built everything she had by herself, piece by piece, in a country that was not hers, in a language she had taught herself, in an industry that had not been designed with her in mind. She was not looking for anyone, which is the precise condition under which the wrong person, or the right one, depending on how you look at it, tends to arrive. Kim Jae-won was born in Incheon on a Tuesday in March, which his mother always said explained his personality. Tuesdays in March in Incheon are cold and gray and give nothing away. His father, Kim Dong-hyun, collected debts for a mid-tier criminal organization called the Woolgang Group. Not a glamorous position. He drove a 10-year-old Hyundai and came home smelling like cigarettes and other men's fear and expected dinner on the table and silence from his son. Jae-won gave him the silence. He was good at that from very early. His mother, Park In-suk, was a primary school teacher. She was warm in the way people become warm when they've spent a long time compensating for someone cold. She read to Jae-won every night until he was old enough to tell her she didn't have to anymore. And then she kept doing it anyway because they both understood it wasn't really about the books. Jae-won watched his father his entire childhood and made two observations he never forgot. The first, his father used fear as his primary tool. And fear required maintenance. You had to keep demonstrating it. You had to be loud, visible, threatening. And that visibility was a liability. Because visible things can be targeted. Loud things can be tracked. The second, the men his father worked for were never seen. They didn't threaten. They didn't appear. And yet everyone in that world, police, politicians, rival organizations, men twice his father's size, arranged their lives around what those invisible men might want. Not out of fear. Out of something more durable than fear. Respect built on complete dependency. At 16, Jae-won started running messages for a low-level Woolgang operator in their neighborhood. Nothing serious. He was a kid on a bicycle. Nobody looked at him twice. At 17, he was recruited directly into the CO syndicate, at the time the largest criminal organization operating in Seoul. He started at the absolute bottom, watching parking lots, standing outside doors, moving money in envelopes between men who didn't speak to each other directly. But people started to notice something about this quiet kid from Incheon. He never lost his temper. In an environment where violence was both currency and entertainment, Jae-won never hit anyone who didn't have it coming, never raised his voice, never made a scene. He handled problems the way a surgeon handles an incision. Precise, minimal, effective. He remembered everything. Names, faces, debts, relationships, who owed what to whom and why and since when. He cataloged it all without writing any of it down. His memory was the filing system, and it never misfiled anything. And he understood, faster than anyone around him, that information was more valuable than muscle. That the man who knew everything had leverage over everyone. That leverage, applied correctly, never needed to escalate. By 22, he was the CO syndicate's most trusted information broker. By 25, he was running 3 of their district operations. By 27, he had cultivated 14 personal relationships with city officials, councilmen, a deputy police commissioner, 2 judges, and a tax authority director, all of whom had, at various points, accepted things from Jae-won that they could not afford to have made public. Not because he blackmailed them. He never had to. He simply made sure they understood, quietly, that their comfort and his goodwill were connected. Then the CO syndicate's founder, an aging man named Co Byung-kyu, died of a stroke at 71. What followed was 3 months of the ugliest internal conflict Seoul's underworld had seen in a decade. 4 men moved for control. 3 of them did it loudly, reorganizing loyalties, making threats, cutting deals that broadcast their moves to everyone paying attention. Jae-won did none of that. He said nothing publicly, attended meetings, listened, made no alliances and no enemies. While the three loud men maneuvered against each other, accumulating grudges, burning resources, exposing themselves, Jae-won continued doing what he had always done. Being useful, being reliable, being invisible. By the time the three-way war burned itself out, one man dead, one in custody, one fled to Busan. Jae-won was the only person standing who still had every relationship intact, every resource untouched, every option open. He didn't seize power. He simply occupied the space the others had destroyed themselves vacating. He was 29. Young Tae-soo had been with him since the Woolgang days. Shorter than Jae-won. Broader. The kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of something that didn't move easily. He was the only person Jae-won consulted about anything. Not because he always agreed with him, but because he always told him exactly what he thought regardless of what Jae-won wanted to hear. You have no weakness, Tae-soo told him once, the year after the succession. They were sitting in a car outside a restaurant in Itaewon at 1 a.m. waiting for someone to come out. Everyone has a weakness, Jae-won said. Yours isn't here yet, Tae-soo said. But it's coming. Jae-won looked at him. What does that mean? It means you've never wanted anything you couldn't calculate. The day you want something you can't calculate, Tae-soo shrugged. That's the day somebody has you. Jae-won said nothing. 2 years later, he walked into a business dinner in Gangnam and sat down next to a Nigerian woman who responded to his test in perfect Korean without blinking. And Tae-soo, watching from across the room, understood immediately that his timeline had just been confirmed. The dinner was at a private room in a Gangnam restaurant called Chongwon, the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the private rooms had no windows. Maya wasn't supposed to be there. Director Yang had been scheduled to attend representing Hansong Trading. But Yang had developed a fever that afternoon and called Maya at 5 p.m. You're going instead. Tonight. In 2 hours. Or something that says you belong there before you open your mouth. Maya wore a dark green dress she had bought for a work event the previous year and had worn exactly once. She took the subway to Gangnam, walked the last 3 blocks in heels that were slightly too high for the wet pavement, and arrived at Chongwon at exactly 7:30 p.m. The host looked at her name on the list. Looked at her. Looked at the list again. He seated her at the far end of the secondary table, away from the main gathering of 12 men in dark suits who were already deep into their second bottles of Bexiju. The placement was deliberate. The kind of thing that happens so smoothly you're supposed to not notice it. Maya noticed it. She sat down, ordered water, and began listening. Jae-won arrived at 7:52. He didn't apologize for being late. He walked through the room the way he always did, not scanning it like someone looking for threats, but taking it in whole, the way you'd read a page. One look, complete picture. He had been to 100 of these dinners. He knew who everyone was before he arrived. He knew what they wanted, what they owed, what they were afraid of. He could have conducted the entire evening blindfolded. His eyes moved across the room and reached the secondary table and stopped. Not because of the green dress. Not because of how she looked. Because of how she was sitting. Completely still. Back straight. Hands in her lap. Not performing attentiveness. Actually attentive. In a room full of men who were either talking or waiting for their turn to talk. She was the only person who was genuinely, quietly listening. And her face, when one of the men at the main table said something condescending about a trade deal, her face didn't react in any visible way. But her eyes moved to her water glass for exactly 1 second and then came back up. She had caught it, filed it, said nothing. Jae-won signaled the host. 2 words. The host nodded and went to the secondary table. A minute later, Maya's place setting was being moved to the seat directly to Jae-won's left at the main table. The men around the table adjusted without comment. In Jae-won's world, you didn't ask him why he did things. You adjusted. Maya sat down. She picked up her water glass and took a small sip and looked straight ahead. Jae-won waited until the table's conversation resumed around them. Then he said quietly, in Korean, "You look like the most dangerous person in this room." Maya took another sip of water. "I know," she said, in perfect Korean, without turning her head. "That's why they sat me in the corner. A beat. Until someone moved you," he said. "Until someone moved me," she agreed. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time. He was looking at her with an expression she would spend a long time afterward trying to categorize. Not attraction, or not only that. Something more specific. The look of a man who has just encountered a variable he didn't account for and is deciding whether it's a problem or an asset. She decided immediately that she didn't particularly care which one she was. Kim Jae-won, he said. I know who you are, she said. Maya Osei. Hansong Trading. Director Yang's seat. She has a fever. Her loss, he said. It wasn't a line. It was just a fact, stated plainly. That was the thing about him she noticed first. He didn't perform. Not even slightly. She almost smiled. He found reasons to be near her over the following weeks. Not in a way that announced itself. A second invitation to an event where their firms overlapped. A message from his office requesting a specific report that could only come from her division. A car that appeared outside her building one late evening when she was working past 10 p.m., not with him in it, just a driver with instructions to take her home safely because the area's street lighting had been out for a week. She sent the car back, but she kept the information. She knew by the third week what his name meant in certain circles. She had asked careful questions of the right people at Hansong and received answers that were delivered quietly and accompanied by the particular expression people use when they're telling you something they expect will make you step back. She didn't step back. She needed to understand why, so she sat with it honestly, the way she sat with all difficult things, and what she came back to was this. She had grown up watching her mother navigate a world full of men who used the appearance of legitimacy to take from people who had nothing. The men she'd seen at Hansong's private client meetings. The local government officials in Mushin who took market fees and built nothing. The ones who smiled and signed papers and destroyed things quietly. Jae-won destroyed things too. She was not pretending otherwise. But he had looked her in the eye at that dinner and spoken to her like someone whose answer he actually wanted. He had moved her to the right table without making it a gesture. In her experience, that was rarer than it had any right to be. If this story is hitting different, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Confessions TV. We post every week, and it only gets more intense from here. They had their first real private conversation 6 weeks after the Chongwon dinner. Not a meeting, not a dinner with other people present. Just the two of them, at a small restaurant in Yongsan that Jae-won had booked entirely for the evening without explaining why to the owner, who didn't ask. They ate. They talked. Carefully at first, the way two people talk when they are both fully aware that the other person is intelligent enough to hear what isn't being said. About Lagos. About Incheon. About what it meant to build something in a city that hadn't prepared a space for you. Then he put down his chopsticks and looked at her. You know what I am, he said. You've known for weeks. And you're still here. I'm here right now, she said. I don't make promises past the end of an evening. That's fair, he said. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Most men in your position don't volunteer the information. He picked up his chopsticks again. Set them back down. Because I want you to make a decision with accurate information, he said. Whatever that decision is. She looked at him for a long time. That might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me in this country, she said. Then the bar is low, he said. She laughed, not politely, genuinely, and the sound of it moved something in the room. They were together for 2 years before he asked her to marry him. He didn't do it with a ring or a restaurant. He did it at 7 a.m. on a Saturday in her apartment in Mapogu while she was making tea, and he was reading something on his phone at her kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, which he had started leaving there on weekends without it ever being formally discussed. He looked up from his phone. Marry me, he said. She poured her tea. Okay, she said. He went back to his phone. Later she would tell Soo-yeon about it, and Soo-yeon would press her hands to her face and say, that's it? That's the proposal? And Maya would say it was perfect and mean it completely. The wedding was small. 15 people. A private room at a restaurant in Hanamdong. No announcement. No social media. No photographs that left the room. Tae-soo pulled Jae-won aside before it started. They stood in a narrow hallway outside the private room. Tae-soo's face carried the particular expression of a man delivering information he knows won't be well received. She's a vulnerability, he said. I need you to understand that clearly. Anyone who wants to move against you now has a way in. Jae-won looked at him. I know, he said. And I'm marrying her in 12 minutes. So what I need from you, Tae-soo, is not your concern. What I need is your word that she is protected at every level of this organization from today forward. Tae-soo held his gaze. Then he nodded once. You have it, he said. Good. Jae-won straightened his jacket. She's the only thing I've done in 15 years that had nothing to do with strategy. Which means she's the only thing that's entirely mine. Don't make me explain that twice. He walked back into the room. Tae-soo stayed in the hallway for a moment. Then he took out his phone and made 3 calls in under 2 minutes to the heads of the 3 operational divisions he ran. By the time the ceremony started, every person in Jae-won's organization had been informed, through whatever chain was appropriate to their level, that Kim Jae-won's wife was untouchable. The pregnancy came 2 years into the marriage. Maya told him on a Tuesday evening. She had found out that morning. She had sat with it alone all day, not from doubt, just needing a few hours with it by herself first, which was how she handled every significant thing. He was home by 7 p.m. She was at the kitchen table, the same table where he had proposed, with 2 cups of tea already made. He sat down, read the room, said nothing. She slid a small white test across the table. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put his face in his hands. Not dramatically, quietly, like a man setting down something very heavy he'd been carrying for a long time without realizing it. Maya watched him. She didn't move or speak. After about 30 seconds, he looked up. His eyes were red. Boy or girl, he asked. I don't know yet, she said. I want to know, he said. I know you do, she said. We'll find out. He reached across the table and took her hand and didn't let go for a long time. The next morning, he called Tae-soo at 6 a.m. Maya is pregnant, he said. 6 weeks. I need a new protocol. Tae-soo was quiet for a moment. How comprehensive. Complete, Jae-won said. She moves through this city untouched. By anyone. I don't care who they are, what they want, or what context they think justifies it. There is no context. There is no exception. Communicate that to every level. Today. Done, Tae-soo said. Tae-soo. Yeah. If anyone tests it, Jae-won paused. Handle it in a way that means nobody tests it twice. The line went quiet for a second. Understood, Tae-soo said. By the time October came and Maya was 6 months along and stepping out of a black car in the rain outside ONYX, every single person in Kim Jae-won's organization knew that rule. Every person except Park Sung-jin, who was not in Kim Jae-won's organization, who was not in any organization, who was just a man at a door with a small amount of power and no idea whatsoever what he was about to put into motion. Inside the car, after the call, Maya sat without moving. Her cheek was starting to swell. Not badly, but enough that she could feel the warmth of it spreading up toward her eye. She pressed 2 fingers against it once, briefly. Then she put her hand back in her lap. She looked at her phone, pulled up Soo-yeon's number, and typed. Something happened outside. I'm okay. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow. Soo-yeon responded in 30 seconds. What happened? Maya. Maya put the phone face down on the seat. She looked at the entrance of ONYX through the rain-covered window. Sung-jin was back at his post. He was talking to the other doorman, gesturing with his hands, recounting something. Both of them laughed. Maya watched them for exactly 5 seconds. Then she told the driver to take her home. Across the city in a private room at a restaurant in Cheongdam-dong, Kim Jae-won was in the middle of a sentence. He was sitting at a round table with 3 men, a property developer, a logistics company owner, and a man whose official title was senior advisor to the Seoul metropolitan government, but whose actual function Jae-won understood precisely. They were 40 minutes into a conversation about a land acquisition in Mapo that had 3 different layers of complexity. Jae-won was the only one at the table who fully understood all 3 layers. He was walking them through the second. His phone was face down on the table to his right. It moved. He didn't look at it. But Tae-soo, 2 seats away, saw the screen light up from the angle he was sitting at and registered the name. Jae-won continued his sentence to its natural end. Then he said, without any change in tone, "Excuse me for a moment." He stood, walked out of the room, into the corridor. The restaurant's ambient noise dropped as the door closed behind him. He answered, "Yobo." 4 words came through the line. Quiet. Even. He said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "The baby?" "Fine." 1 more second of silence. "Go home. Lock the door. I'll be there before sunrise." He ended the call, stood in the corridor for exactly the length of 1 slow breath. Then he walked back into the room, sat down, and resumed his sentence from where he had left it. The 3 men at the table noticed nothing. Tae-soo noticed everything. He had been watching Jae-won's left hand under the table from the moment he came back in. It was completely still. Tae-soo excused himself 2 minutes later, walked outside to the street, and began making calls. What happened next did not look like revenge. It didn't announce itself. There were no men dispatched with instructions. No direct calls to Park Sung-jin or Director Choi. No threats. No visits. It looked like the city's infrastructure making a series of unrelated administrative decisions in the middle of the night. At 12:04 a.m., the owner of Seoul's largest premium spirits distributor, a man named Choi Byung-ho, who had been asleep since 10:30, received a call from his oldest business partner. The conversation lasted 28 seconds. By the end of it, Byung-ho had agreed to cancel his supply contract with ONYX, effective immediately, under a compliance review clause that nobody at ONYX had read closely enough when they signed it. He would send the formal notification by email at 7 a.m. At 12:31 a.m., an automated legal notice was triggered by a clause embedded in ONYX's building lease, inserted 18 months prior during a refinancing negotiation by a law firm that Jae-won's holding company retained. The clause was legitimate. It had been reviewed by 2 separate legal teams at the time and cleared. It had simply never been activated. It gave ONYX 30 days to vacate the premises. At 1:15 a.m., 3 city councilmen, all of whom had attended ONYX's private events on multiple occasions, received quiet messages through intermediaries they recognized. Not threats, reminders, of evenings, of receipts, of small details that their respective households did not currently know about. Each of them responded the same way. They stopped returning Director Choi's calls. At 1:47 a.m., a fraud alert was filed with the Financial Crimes Unit, anonymous but detailed. It included accurate records of cash income that Park Sung-jin had received over 8 months and not reported. His bank account was flagged. Pending investigation, access was restricted. At 2:02 a.m., his car was towed from outside his apartment building. An outstanding parking violation from 6 weeks ago, the kind of thing that gets overlooked indefinitely when nothing is pushing it, was suddenly being processed. At 2:15 a.m., his landlord received a notice from the building's management company about a lease discrepancy that required immediate review. Sung-jin was still at the bar with his co-workers, on his 3rd drink, completely unaware that the architecture of his daily life was being quietly disassembled from every direction simultaneously. At 2:30 a.m., Director Choi was still inside ONYX, sitting alone in the VIP section, his phone in his hand, and his 3rd unanswered call of the last hour going to voicemail. He knew what coordinated pressure looked like. He'd survived in this city for 20 years partly by knowing the difference between bad luck and a targeted operation. This was not bad luck. He made one final call to a retired police commissioner named General O, a man who had navigated every political shift in Seoul for 3 decades and was still standing because he knew more about more people than anyone in the city. O picked up on the 2nd ring. Choi talked for 90 seconds, explained the supplier cancellation, the lease notice, the councilman going silent. He kept his voice measured, but O could hear the thing underneath it. O was quiet for a moment. Who did your people put their hands on tonight? Nobody significant. Just some African WO. Stop. O's voice changed. Stop talking. Are you still in the building? Yes. Listen to me very carefully. Do you know whose building you're sitting in right now? Silence. Call Kim Jae-won's office first thing in the morning. Don't negotiate. Don't explain. Don't send a lawyer first. You call. And you beg. The line went dead. Choi lowered his phone. The club was empty around him. The music had been turned off 20 minutes ago. The last staff were moving quietly near the bar, not looking at him. He sat there in the silence of his own emptiness and understood, for the first time in 20 years, what it felt like to be on the wrong side of something he couldn't talk his way out of. If this story has you hooked, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us what you think Jae-won does next, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Confessions TV so you don't miss the ending. Jae-won arrived at ONYX at 3:17 a.m. He came in a single car. No convoy. No visible security. He stepped out onto the wet pavement in the same clothes he'd worn to dinner, dark jacket, open collar, and walked to the entrance without slowing down. The door opened before he reached it. The staff member who opened it had been told to expect him. He had been told by someone he trusted without question, who had been told by someone else, in a chain that went back to Tae-soo's calls 3 hours earlier. The man held the door without making eye contact. Jae-won walked in. The club was empty. The lights were at half, the kind of dim that stays on after close. The smell of alcohol and artificial fog and the particular staleness of a room that's been full of people and is now suddenly not. Director Choi was standing near the bar. He had prepared something to say. Some version of an apology that also managed to explain, to contextualize, to position Sung-jin's actions as an isolated incident carried out by an employee who did not reflect the establishment's values. Jae-won walked past him. He crossed the floor to the best table in the room, a round corner booth that was listed in ONYX's reservation system under a corporate name Director Choi had never questioned and which had been held continuously for 3 years under a standing arrangement Choi's predecessor had agreed to before Choi bought the club. Jae-won sat down, settled in, placed both hands flat on the table. "Water," he said to no one in particular. A glass appeared within 40 seconds. He waited. Tae-soo materialized from somewhere near the back. Maya never saw him arrive. Director Choi hadn't noticed him come in and sat at a table 12 feet away. He ordered nothing, said nothing, just sat with his hands in his lap and watched the room. Sung-jin was brought in at 3:24 a.m. 2 men had knocked on his apartment door at 3:05. He had been awake. The bank notification, the towing, the landlord message had seen to that. He had been sitting on his couch in the dark trying to figure out if these things were connected and, if they were, to what. He opened the door. 2 men in plain clothes. One he recognized vaguely from the neighborhood. They didn't identify themselves. They just said there was someone who wanted to speak with him and that it would be in his interest to come. He came. He was not physically forced. But there are invitations you understand, on a cellular level, are not optional. He was still in the clothes from the bar, jeans, a gray jacket. He looked around the empty club as they walked him in. His eyes found Tae-soo first, then moved to the corner booth. He saw a man in a dark jacket sitting alone at a table. Calm. No expression. Not large, not physically imposing. Just sitting there the way people sit when they have nowhere else they need to be. Sung-jin's first instinct, and he would replay this moment for years afterward, was that this didn't look like what he'd imagined. He'd been picturing something more theatrical, more obviously dangerous. He crossed the floor, stopped at the table. Jae-won looked at him. Not the way people look at someone they're angry at. The way people look at something they are simply, completely, assessing. Sung-jin opened his mouth. Jae-won raised one finger from the table. Sung-jin closed his mouth. Jae-won reached into his jacket. He placed Maya's membership card on the table between them. Black, still slightly damp from the rain where it had landed on the pavement. He pushed it slowly across the table toward Sung-jin. "Read the name," he said. Sung-jin looked down. He read it. His face went through 3 distinct changes in under 4 seconds. Confusion first, the name not immediately registering. Then recognition, partial, the surname landing somewhere in his memory. Then full comprehension, the first and last name together, in that specific combination, unlocking something he had heard in fragments from multiple sources over the past year. He looked up. Jae-won was watching him with the exact same expression he'd had 30 seconds ago. Nothing had changed in his face. "She is 28 years old," Jae-won said. His voice was conversational. The volume you'd use to talk to someone 2 feet away in a quiet room. "She came to this country alone at 19. She built everything she has herself. She speaks this language better than half the people in this room would if there were people in this room. She is 6 months pregnant." He let that land. "With my son." Sung-jin's mouth opened slightly. "And you put your hand across her face," Jae-won said. "Outside, in the rain, in front of people with phones." Sung-jin started to say something. The beginning of an explanation. The words, "I didn't know," were forming. Jae-won looked at him with something that was almost curiosity. "I know you didn't know," he said. "That is the only reason this conversation is happening instead of something else." He picked the membership card up from the table, put it back in his jacket. "Here is what happens now. You leave Seoul before the end of this week. You go back to Busan. Your mother lives in Sinseondong. She is not part of this. She stays not part of this as long as you go quietly and stay quiet. Your finances will take some time to resolve. Find a good lawyer, though given your current account situation, that will be a challenge." He stood, adjusted his jacket. "Your career in this city's hospitality industry is over. Not because I ended it, Because every person in that industry will know what you did by Monday morning and none of them will want the liability. That part handles itself. He looked at Sung Jin one final time. Not if you understand. Sung Jin nodded. His hands were not steady. Jae-won turned toward the exit. He stopped near Director Choi, who had been standing at the room's edge the entire time, close enough to hear, too afraid to move. Your lawyers will receive correspondence Monday morning about the lease. I'd advise you not to respond through litigation. The outcome of that path is not in your interest. He walked toward the door. At the threshold he paused. Didn't turn around. This building disrespected my family. I need that understood, not as a personal matter between us. As a fact about this city. About what is and isn't done here. He walked out. The door closed. The room was completely silent. Tae-soo stood, buttoned his jacket, and followed him out without looking at either man. Choi and Sung Jin stood in the empty club and said nothing to each other. Outside, the rain had stopped. Maya was awake when Jae-won got home. She was on the couch in the living room. No lights on except the small lamp in the corner, the one she always left on when she was waiting for him, though she had never said that was what it was for, and he had never asked. She was in a sweater and socks, legs pulled under her, a cup of tea on the table that had gone cold an hour ago. He came through the door at 4:50 a.m. Saw her. Stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. He crossed the room, sat down next to her, and put both hands on her face. Gently, completely, the way you hold something you are still terrified of losing. He turned her face slightly toward the lamp. Her left cheek was swollen. Not badly, but enough. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Jae-won, she said. I'm okay. I know. Are you done? He lowered his hand slowly. Sat back. Looked at the ceiling. Almost, he said. What's almost? The building situation takes a few weeks. The rest is done. She was quiet for a moment. The man at the door. Gone by Friday. You didn't. No, he said. Simple. Immediate. He turned and looked at her. No. She held his eyes for a second. Then she nodded once. He reached over and put his hand on her stomach. Still. Flat. Waiting. 5 seconds. 10. Then Toby moved. A slow roll. A push from the inside. The kind of movement that always felt to Maya like a question being asked from somewhere very close and very far away simultaneously. Jae-won's hand pressed back, slightly. The gentlest possible response. They sat like that for a while. The lamp. The cold tea. The city outside starting its earliest sounds. He's going to be stubborn, Jae-won said. He already is, Maya said. He gets that from you. He gets that from you, she said. I'm patient. You're stubborn. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He almost smiled. She saw it. That same thing she had seen at the Chongwon dinner, the first time she'd made him do it. The thing that still felt like a privilege. She rested her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. Park Sung-jin left Seoul 4 days later. He took a bus. Not because he couldn't afford the train. His account was still frozen and would remain so through a process that would take 7 months to fully resolve. He sat at the back of the bus with a bag and watched the city slide away through the window. He never spoke about that night publicly. Not to friends. Not online. When the video surfaced 3 weeks later and spread across every platform and his face was everywhere and his phone, which he had a new number for by then, did not stop for 4 days, he said nothing. He watched the 40 million views accumulate from a small bedroom in his mother's house in Busan and said nothing. His mother asked him once, in the kitchen, while he was eating breakfast, "Is that you in the video?" He kept eating. Sung Jin. "Don't," he said. She didn't ask again. ONYX lasted another 6 weeks. Director Choi fought the lease through a law firm he retained at significant expense. The firm reviewed the clause, reviewed the counter-arguments available, reviewed the identity of the opposing party's legal representation, and then advised Choi in a meeting that lasted 12 minutes to settle immediately and unconditionally. He did. ONYX closed on a Thursday in December. By February, the renovation had begun. By April, it reopened under a new name, a detail the nightlife press covered as a routine ownership change with no further context. The new membership policy was different in one specific way that every door staff member was briefed on during their first week of employment. The establishment welcomed guests of all backgrounds without exception, and any staff member who could not operate within that standard would not remain staff. The membership committee that oversaw admissions operated quietly, without any public profile. Maya was on it. Her name appeared nowhere. She reviewed applications twice a month from her home office, made decisions efficiently, and moved on. Toby was born on a Thursday morning in January. He came fast, faster than the doctors expected, which Maya's obstetrician described as a good sign, and which Maya privately interpreted as her son having already decided he wasn't going to be kept waiting for anything. He was healthy, loud from the first second. The nurse who handed him to Maya said he had looked around the room the moment they put him under the warmer. Not the unfocused looking of most newborns, but something that appeared, absurdly, purposeful. They named him Toby Kim. Toby, Yoruba for God is great. The name Maya's mother Grace had decided on for her first grandchild years before Maya left Lagos. The name she had never announced to anyone, just held on to privately, the way you hold on to a thing you know is coming. When Maya called Grace from the hospital room and said the name, Grace went quiet for a long time. "How did you know?" Grace said. "You told me," Maya said. "You never said it out loud. But you told me." Grace cried. Maya did not cry. She had cried earlier, in the delivery room, when Toby was placed on her chest, and she had looked at this person who hadn't existed outside of her body 3 minutes ago and felt the full weight of every single thing she had survived to get to this room. She didn't cry again. She just held him. Jae-won sat in the chair beside her bed with Toby against his chest, one large hand spread across the baby's entire back. He spoke quietly, alternating without thinking between Korean and Yoruba, the two languages that between them contained every important thing in his life. Maya watched him. This man, this city, this child, this life she had built from an empty tin and a folded map and a scholarship that didn't cover half of what it needed to cover. She thought about Mushin, about Grace at 4 a.m. in the market, about a waiting room at 2 a.m. outside a hospital 4 years ago when she had sat in the cold and decided to stay. She had made every choice with open eyes. She had no regrets. 3 weeks later, the video of the slap reached 40 million views. Then 50. Then it stopped being about a number and started being about a conversation, about Seoul's nightlife, about race, about what happens to people who move through a country that wasn't built with them in mind and build something anyway. Maya didn't participate in the conversation publicly. She read some of it, put her phone down, picked up Toby. Jae-won watched the number climb from across the living room one evening and said nothing for a while. Then, "They're going to keep looking for you," he said. "I know," Maya said. "Journalists. The platforms. Someone will eventually connect the name on the card too." "I know, Jae-won." He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" She thought about it. Toby was asleep against her chest. The lamp was on. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did, moving, humming, holding its secrets. "Nothing yet," she said. "And when yet becomes now." She looked at Jae-won across the room. "Then we decide together." He nodded, settled back, opened his phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up. "Maya, Tae-soo found something." She turned and looked at him. Something in his voice, not alarm, but a specific stillness she recognized. The stillness that came before things became complicated. "Found what?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his phone, then back at her. "The 2 men who arranged the shooting 4 years ago, in Mapo. I told you they were handled." "You did," she said. "Carefully. One of them was," he said. "The other one wasn't. He's been in Japan for 4 years. Tokyo. He came back last week. The lamp. The sleeping baby. The city outside. And," Maya said, "and Tae-soo says he's been making contact with people who have reasons to want things from me that I'm not going to give them." "What kind of things?" Jae-won set his phone face down on the armrest. He looked at her with that expression, completely open, completely honest, the one he had described at their first real dinner as giving her accurate information to make a decision with. "The kind," he said quietly, "that require them to have something I care about." The room went still. Toby shifted slightly in Maya's arms. She held him closer without looking down. "How long have you known?" she said. 20 minutes, he said. She believed him. She looked at her son, at his father across the room, at the life she had chosen with open eyes and would choose again without hesitation. "Then we have 20 minutes head start," she said. Jae-won looked at her. "On what?" "On whatever comes next," she said. "So stop sitting there and start thinking." He held her gaze for one long second. Then he picked up his phone. "What happens when the man who came back from Tokyo makes his move?" And the one thing Jae-won cannot protect with strategy alone is the one thing being targeted. That story is coming, and it will hit harder than this one. If this episode lived in your chest, you already know what to do. Hit the like button, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from and what you think happens next, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Confessions TV because the next chapter of Maya and Jae-won's story drops soon, and you do not want to miss it.